vast realms of Norse mythology, where the heavens met the earth and the clash of gods and Jotun echoed through eternity, a formidable presence emerged, a thunderous force known as Thor, the god of thunder. In the heart of this tale, Thor stood as the guardian of Midgard, the mortal realm, where storms roared like ancient beasts and destiny loomed like an ever-present shadow. This is the riveting story of Thor, the god of thunder, a name that was forever etched into the annals of legend. In the heavenly realm of Asgard, where the divine and earthly converged, Odin the All-Father gazed upon the earth itself and found a connection that would forge the destiny of a god. Jord, a Jotun and the embodiment of the earth itself, caught Odin's eye. She was a serene and nurturing figure, but was also powerful, being tied to the forces of nature. Through their connection, Jord soon became pregnant and gave birth to Thor, infusing him with a unique bond to the very ground he would one day protect. Thor was raised amidst the towering spires of Asgard. Thor was also the brother to many prominent gods in Norse mythology, such as Baldur, the god of light, Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, Tyr, the god of war, Vali and Vidar, the gods of vengeance, Bragi, the god of poetry, and Hodur, the god of darkness. The halls of Asgard resonated with the echoes of Thor's laughter and the thunderous footsteps that foretold of his greatness. A family of gods with Odin as the patriarch formed the backdrop of Thor's early years. This familial bond, woven with threads of love, rivalry, and destiny, set the stage for the unfolding saga of a god whose name would resonate through the 9 realms. Even as a baby, Thor was said to possess a large stature and great strength. He once demonstrated his strength to the gods by lifting and tossing 10 loads of bearskins. Though he was often good-tempered, if pushed far enough, Thor could fall into a terrible rage that threatened to destroy everything in his path. As the young god grew, his destiny unfurled like the branches of Yggdrasil. Midgard, the realm of mortals, would soon witness the mighty god of thunder descending from the heavens, a beacon of strength and valor. Thus began the divine tale of Thor, whose footsteps left thunderous imprints upon the very fabric of existence. In the luminous halls of Asgard, Thor emerged as a figure of unparalleled might. Muscles sculpted from the very essence of storms adorned his towering frame, and a beard cascaded down, mirroring the raw power surging within him. Yet Thor's strength transcended the physical. It emanated from a heart as bold as a lion's roar and a spirit impulsive as the lightning that danced across the heavens. As the guardian of Midgard, Thor bore the weight of responsibility on his broad shoulders. His role as the protector of mortals was more than a duty. It was a calling that echoed through the realms. Wielding Mjolnir, the mighty hammer forged with the essence of thunderstorms, Thor harnessed the very storms he commanded to safeguard the realms from threats that lurked in the shadows. Thor's intelligence, often overshadowed by his physical prowess, was a beacon of strategic brilliance. His decisions, though impulsive at times, were fueled by a wisdom that cut through the complexities of politics and conflicts. Thor's presence was a force that balanced the scales of justice, a living testament to the fusion of strength and intellect. Thor first found love with Jarnsaxa, a Jotun and a wave maiden. She was one of the 9 daughters of Aegir, the Jotun ruler of the oceans, and Ran, the goddess of the sea. Hailing from Jotunheim, she, along with her 8 sisters, were the 9 mothers of Heimdall. Together with Thor, she gave birth to 2 sons, Magni, the god of strength, and Modi, the god of wrath. However, Thor and Jarnsaxa's love was brief, and his heart found its counterpart when he encountered Sif, the goddess of grain and fertility. She possessed hair that flowed down her back and spun from the finest strands of gold. This golden hair would later attract the attention of Loki, who slashed it off. Their union became the bedrock of Thor's humanity, amidst his brutality and responsibilities. Sif already had a child of her own before meeting Thor, making him a stepfather. His name was Ul, and he was the god of winter and hunting. Together, Thor and Sif bore witness to the miracle of life, giving birth to a daughter named Thrud. Thrud was the goddess of battle and possessed incredible strength and power to rival thunderstorms given her parentage. She is often considered one of the Valkyrie, though the sources supporting this are sparse. All of Thor's children were prophesized to survive the events of Ragnarok, and the brothers, Magni and Modi, were prophesized to inherit Mjolnir. Thor's family, a glorious assemblage within Asgard, added layers to his character. The god, whose name resonated with the boom of thunder, revealed a softer side, a side bound by love, kinship, and the profound joys of familial bonds. Thor, the mighty protector, stood not only as a god but as a father, husband, and a beacon of love. When it came to alliances and rivalries, Thor's bond with Loki painted a complex mural of friendship and discord. Loki, the wily trickster, often tested the god of thunder's patience with schemes that danced on the edge of chaos. Yet, in the ebb and flow of camaraderie, their adventures became legends that resonated through the ages. Thor's thunderous laughter echoed in the wake of Loki's mischief. Together, they faced threats, delved into the depths of realms unknown, and navigated the labyrinth of politics. Through battles and banter, their bond became a testament to the intricate threads woven into the fabric of godhood. Yet, beneath the surface of camaraderie, shadows lurked. Loki's schemes sometimes pushed the boundaries of trust, challenging the very foundations of their relationship. One of the most well-known stories being Loki and Sif's hair. The story begins with Loki thinking about what mischief he could cause. As he pondered, he decided that it would be fun to shave Sif's head while she slept. Since Sif's hair was her defining characteristic, the loss of it would provide Loki with some amusement, while no doubt also enraging Thor. This was a win-win proposal in Loki's mind. That night, Loki shaved Sif bald as she slept beside Thor. When Thor woke up the next morning, he flew into a destructive rage, as he instantly knew Loki was to blame. Thor searched Asgard and eventually found him. He threatened to break all his bones at once unless he restored Sif's beautiful hair. Fearing for his life, Loki apologized and begged to be released. He promised to go to the realm of the dwarves beneath the earth. He assured Thor that he will locate some craftsmen who could forge anything and even make Sif a golden head of hair more impressive than her original. Thor thought about this and decided to release Loki, since he could simply catch him once again if he was lying. Loki quickly traveled to Nidavellir under the earth. Loki located the dwarven craftsmen, the sons of Ivaldi, and asked for their help. After some convincing, the brothers made Sif a beautiful headdress of gold to replace her hair, and then proceeded to create 2 more items. Skidbladnir, a magical flying ship given to Freyr. The ship could fold into a small size and fit in one's pocket. Hrungnir, a magically imbued and powerful spear, was gifted to Odin. It was known for its precision, guaranteeing that it would always hit its target. Upon receiving these gifts, Loki quickly brought them back to Asgard to appease the other gods. Sif was satisfied with her new golden headdress, which calmed Thor. His anger subsided, and Loki was allowed to walk away unscathed. Nestled deep within the caverns of Nidavellir, the realm of the dwarves, there existed a fiery forge. In the heart of this forge stood 2 brothers, Sindri and Brokr, who toiled under the watchful gaze of the Aesir gods. These skilled artisans crafted Mjolnir, a masterpiece destined for the hands of Thor, the god of thunder. The rhythmic clanging of their hammers echoed through the stone chambers, resonating with the very pulse of creation. However, the reason behind its creation was not because of Thor, but rather because of the trickster Loki. Loki, being a nuisance, decided to stir a bit of drama into his everyday life. He bet his head with the dwarven brothers that they could not create items more impressive than those crafted by the sons of Ivaldi. The sons of Ivaldi were expert dwarven craftsmen who fashioned Freyr's flying ship Skidbladnir, Odin's spear, Hrungnir, as well as Sif's golden hair, as mentioned before. Sindri and Brokr, offended at Loki's remarks, accepted the challenge and began their work in a forge. During the forging process, Loki, in an attempt to sabotage the creation, transformed into a fly and bit broker. Despite this interference, the brothers were successful. As the molten metal danced in the furnace's embrace, the brothers poured their skill and magic into the hammer, forging it with the essence of thunderstorms. Mjolnir emerged as a weapon of divine craftsmanship, gleaming with the power to summon lightning, storms, and crush mountains. Its handle, adorned with the artistry of the dwarves, held the weight of destinies and responsibility. The dwarves also crafted a boar, called Gullinbursti for Freyr, and a magical ring, Draupnir for Odin. The dwarves ventured to Asgard and told the gods about the wager and demanded Loki's head. Loki points out, however, that he only bet his head, not his neck, and there is no way for them to remove his head without damaging the neck. Puzzled, the dwarves conferred and then settled for sewing Loki's mouth shut tightly before returning home. When Mjolnir found its way into Thor's grasp, the union of god and hammer became a nexus of power. The very air crackled with electricity as Thor swung Mjolnir, commanding the forces of nature to bow to his will. This iconic hammer, an extension of Thor's might, possessed the ability to return to Thor's hand whenever he called for it. It was his primary weapon, and symbolized not only his strength, but also his role as a protector of Midgard. In the subterranean chambers of Nidavellir, where the echoes of hammers striking anvils whispered secrets, Thor found himself engaged in a contest that transcended the realm of physical prowess. Alvis, a knowledgeable dwarf with a mind as sharp as the gleaming edges of his creations, sought to outsmart the god of thunder in a duel of wits. Alvis had approached Thor and declared his intention to marry Thrud, Thor's daughter. Thor, however, was not pleased with the idea of a dwarf becoming his son-in-law and decided to test Alvis. Given Alvis's small physical stature, Thor had to settle on testing his brain rather than brawn. Thor took Alvis to the surface of the earth and under the moonlight engaged him in conversation, filled with tricky questions and riddles. Alvis, being known for his expertise in all things under the sun and moon, answered all of Thor's questions with clever and detailed responses. This exchange continued for hours and throughout the night, with Alvis showcasing his knowledge and brilliance. However, something that Alvis was not prepared for was about to happen. Thor intentionally asked Alvis all these questions for one purpose: to stall, for you see, the dwarves had a weakness to the sun. As the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, Alvis became petrified and slowly turned into stone. Given that Alvis was now unable to marry his daughter, Thor was satisfied with the outcome and returned home, proud that he managed to outsmart the brilliant dwarf. In the ethereal realms of Asgard, a shadow fell upon Thor's legendary hammer, Mjolnir. One morning, Thor awoke to find that his hammer, Mjolnir, was missing. This was no small matter, for without the thunder god's best weapon, Asgard was left vulnerable to the attacks of the Jotun. In a rage, he searched everywhere for his most prized possession. He even tried to recall the hammer through its magical properties, but it was nowhere to be found. The goddess Freya owned falcon feathers with which one could change one's shape into that of a falcon. She lent these to Thor and Loki so that the hammer could be located. Loki, who knew how to shift his shape, donned the feathers and flew off in search of the treasure. He quickly surmised that it had probably been stolen by the Jotun, so he rode the winds to their homeland, Jotunheim. Upon his arrival, Loki changed back into his god form and approached Thrym, the chief of the Jotun. When Loki questioned him regarding the hammer, Thrym answered that he had indeed taken it and that it was buried 8 miles below the ground. Thrym, a lonely, ugly Jotun, told Loki that he had no intention of returning it until Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, was made to be his bride. Loki flew back to Asgard and told this news to his fellow gods, who were alarmed and furious, especially Freya. As they sat in council, Heimdall put forth, perhaps the most humorous of solutions. He proposed that Thor should go to Jotunheim disguised as Freya, and thereby win back his hammer and take vengeance on its thieves. Thor protested, saying that this was a dishonorable and unmanly thing to do, and that all of the inhabitants of Asgard would mock him for it for the rest of his days. Loki loved the idea of Thor in a dress and pointed out that if he didn't consent to Heimdall's plan, Asgard would fall under the rule of the Jotun if they decided to attack. Reluctantly, Thor eventually agreed to the plan. Thor donned the wedding dress and all manner of things to conceal his true identity. After the humiliated god had finished his costume, Loki offered to go with him as his maidservant. The pair climbed into Thor's goat-drawn chariot and made their way to Jotunheim. When they arrived, they were welcomed by the Thrym, who boasted that the gods had at last brought him the prize he was due. At dinner, Thor and Loki found themselves in trouble. Thor single-handedly ate an entire ox, 8 salmon, 3 whole casks of mead, and all of the dainties that had been prepared for the women. This made Thrym suspicious, and he declared that he had never in his whole life seen a woman with such an appetite. Loki quickly devised a response. "The fair goddess has been so lovesick for you," he claimed, "that she hasn't been able to eat for a week." The arrogant Jotun, Thrym, accepted this answer and was overcome by a desire to kiss his bride. When he peeled back the veil, Thor's eyes glared at him so intently that they seemed to burn holes right through him. He exclaimed, "Never have I seen a maiden with such frightfully piercing eyes." Loki, the master of deceit, explained to the Jotun that while Freya had been unable to eat, she had also been unable to sleep because of her eagerness to join Thrym. Thrym accepted this response and called his sister to start the ceremony. Thrym then fetched Mjolnir and placed it on his bride's lap in order to sanctify the marriage. When Mjolnir was laid in Thor's lap, he grabbed its handle and slew Thrym, as well as all of the guests at the ceremony, before contentedly returning to Asgard and changing back into his clothes. Despite being part Jotun himself, Thor despised many of the Jotunen. Thor unleashed this hatred when he tangled with a Jotun called Hrungnir. The story began when Thor was away in the east slaying trolls, one of his favorite pastimes. Odin met Hrungnir in Jotunheim and challenged him to a race, the course of which took the rivals and their steeds all the way to the gates of Asgard. Once there, the gods invited Hrungnir in for a drink. He drank his fill and boasted that he would topple Valhalla, raze Asgard to the ground, slay the gods, and carry Freya and Sif away to be his wives. The gods soon tired of his taunts and called on Thor to return home. Eventually, Thor came into the halls, brandishing his hammer. Upon seeing Hrungnir, Thor was enraged, and he asked who permitted these Jotun to drink there. Thor raised Mjolnir to slay Hrungnir, but Hrungnir called him a coward for striking an unarmed man. Sensing some truth in the Jotun's words, Thor showed mercy and allowed Hrungnir to return to Jotunheimr, where he armed himself with a massive whetstone. In godlike anger, Thor followed Hrungnir and cast his hammer at the Jotun from afar. In response, Hrungnir hurled his whetstone at Thor. The stone struck Mjolnir in mid-flight, however, it shattered into pieces. Mjolnir continued to fly and struck the Jotun on the head, smashing his skull into small crumbs. Though Thor struck down his opponent, he did not escape the encounter without injury. Part of the whetstone found itself lodged in his skull. The gods summoned a healer named Groa, the wife of Aurvandil the Valiant, who successfully began to draw the stone from Thor's head. To encourage her, Thor told her a tale about her husband Aurvandil. Rather than encouraging her, however, the story saddened her, rendering her unable to complete the work. Thus, Hrungnir's stone, as it was now called, remained in Thor's skull until Ragnarok. While Thor and Loki were traveling far from Asgard in Thor's goat-drawn chariot, night overtook them, and they were welcomed into the house of a farmer and his family. To repay his hosts for their hospitality, Thor offered his goats for supper, knowing that he could bring them back to life afterwards and not be at any loss. After the meal, Thor laid the goats' hides on the floor and instructed his hosts to place the bones on the hides after the meat had been gleaned from them. The farmer had 2 children, a boy named Thialfi and a daughter named Roskva. Despite the thunder god's instructions, Thialfi broke open one of the goat's leg bones to suck out the marrow before placing it on the hide with the others. When Thor awoke the following morning, he hollowed the goat hides and bones with his hammer. whereupon the goats sprang back to life. One of them, however, had a lame hind leg. Thor immediately intuited the reason for this, and was so furious at the farmer and his family that he would have slain them all on the spot had the farmer not offered him his children, Thjalfi and Röskva, to be his servants. Thor accepted, and he, Loki, and the children pressed onward on foot, leaving the handicapped goats behind. The party's goal was to reach Jotunheim, the land of the Jotun. They crossed an ocean and a thick, tangled forest. Just as night was falling, they came to a huge hall. They found no one inside and decided to spend the night there. They were jostled awake by a great earthquake. Running outside, they found a sleeping Jotun, whose snores caused the earth to rumble and shake. Thor, with his hatred of the Jotun, clutched his hammer and resolved to smite this sure foe of his. However, the Jotun awoke at the last second and seemed to be cheered, or at least amused, by the sight of Thor and his companions. The Jotun introduced himself as Hrungnir, but said that he already knew full well to whom he was introducing himself. Hrungnir picked up his glove, the great hall in which Thor and his company had slept during the night, and proposed that he accompany them on their journey. To this the god agreed, and off they went through forests and over hills. At night, they took shelter beneath a venerable oak. Hrungnir had been carrying all of their provisions in his bag, and when the Jotun fell asleep and the task of opening the bag fell to Thor, the god found himself unable to untie the Jotun knots. This so angered Thor that he struck the dozing Hrungnir in the forehead, hoping to kill him. The Jotun awoke calmly and asked if a leaf had fallen on his head. Later in the night, the Jotun's snores grew so loud they echoed through the valleys like thunder. Thor, annoyed by his inability to sleep, wanted to kill the Jotun once again. He tried a second time to smite him by striking him on the head. But much as before, Hrungnir awakened and asked if an acorn had fallen on his head. Just before dawn, Thor decided to try one more time to end Hrungnir's life. But the Jotun, awakened, asked if some birds had roosted above him and shaken some dirt from the branches onto his face. Hrungnir departed from Thor and his companions, and the company pressed onward toward a castle called Utgard. Around midday, Thor and the others reached their destination. The gate was locked, and no one was there to open it, but Thor and the others found that they could fit through the very large spaces between the bars of the gate easily enough. Once inside, they found a hall where Jotun sat eating and drinking. Amongst them was the king of this castle, the Jotun Utgarda-Loki, who immediately recognized his new guests and set about taunting them for their minuscule size. Wanting to salvage his dignity and that of his companions, Loki proudly asserted that no one else in this castle could eat food faster than he could. Utgarda-Loki challenged him to prove this boast by entering a contest with one of the Jotun there, whose name was Logi. A tray of meat was set before them, with Loki at one end and Logi at the other, and they were to see who could reach the middle first. They met in the middle at the same time, but while Loki had eaten all of the meat between the end and the middle, Logi had eaten the meat, the bones, and even the tray itself. Loki had clearly lost. Not to be outdone by the Jotun, Thjalfi, who was an extremely swift runner, then offered to race anyone in the castle. Utgarda-Loki led him out to a racetrack and appointed Hugi to compete with him. By the time Hugi reached the finish line, he was so far ahead of Thjalfi that he doubled back to meet his contestant. They raced a second time, and once again Hugi beat Thjalfi by a long bow shot. Still, they raced a third time, but Thjalfi fared even worse. He was still at the midpoint of the track by the time Hugi finished. Thor then challenged anyone in the castle to a drinking contest, something at which he had no little skill. Utgarda-Loki had one of his servants fetch the kind of drinking horn from which Utgarda-Loki's men were said to drink. When it was placed before Thor, Utgarda-Loki informed him that whoever could finish the horn in one breath was considered a great drinker. Whoever could do it in two was considered fair, but no one in his entourage was such a poor drinker as to be unable to finish it in three. Thor drank mightily, but by the time he had to pause for a breath, the level of liquor in the horn had barely lowered. He gave it a second try, struggling to gulp and gulp until his breath failed him. This time, the level had gone down appreciably, but the better part of the horn still remained. His third drink was even more formidable than the previous two, but in the end, much was still left. By that point, however, Thor could drink no more and gave up. Then Utgarda-Loki suggested that Thor attempt to simply lift his cat from the floor, which was small to the Jotun, but massive for Thor. Still, Thor attempted this challenge, but proved unable to do even this. In a rage, Thor challenged anyone in the castle to wrestle with him. Insultingly, Utgarda-Loki appointed an old giantess, Ellie, who was one of his servants. But the great god lost even this contest. After this, Utgarda-Loki decided that there should be no more contests and allowed Thor and the others to spend the night there in the castle. In the morning, they rose and prepared to leave. After Utgarda-Loki had shown them out of the castle, he confided to them what had actually transpired in their contests. He revealed to Thor that he was actually Hrungnir and said, "Now that you have left my castle, I shall see to it that you never enter it again. The knot on my provision bag that you almost succeeded in untying had been wrought in iron. I deflected the blows you attempted to inflict on me with your hammer. Instead of my face, you hit the mountainside and carved 3 gaping valleys into it. Had you struck me, I would have been killed then and there." He continued to say that Loki held his own remarkably well in his eating contest, since his opponent was none other than fire itself. Thjalfi raced against thought, which nobody could ever hope to outrun. The far end of the horn from which you drank was connected to the sea, and we were actually greatly afraid that you were going to drink it all. When you cross over the sea again, you will see how much you have lowered its level. My cat was actually the Midgard serpent, whom you succeeded in raising out of the ocean and into the sky. And finally, you wrestled against old age, and took a long, long time to fall. Now, for your sake and for ours, leave, and never come back." Thor was so angry and humiliated by this trickery that he raised his hammer and prepared to slay Utgarda-Loki and smash his castle to pieces. But when he turned to do so, he saw no Jotun and no castle, just a vast, empty plain. Thor hated many creatures, but none so much as Jormungandr, the sea serpent of Midgard. Coiling around the realms, this ancient serpent of colossal proportions posed a threat to Midgard, its presence foretelling a disturbance in the delicate balance of the cosmos. Jormungandr was one of the 3 monstrous offspring of Loki and the giantess Angerboda, the other 2 being the wolf, Fenrir, and Hel, who presided over a kind of underworld called Helheim, where the souls of the dead gathered. After Jormungandr's birth, Odin hurled the monstrosity into the seas surrounding Midgard. The monster eventually grew so large that it completely encircled Midgard and held its own tail in its mouth. Thor, the thunderous guardian of Midgard, faced the serpentine menace in battles that reverberated through the realms. Jormungandrs, with scales that glistened like stars, tested the god's mettle and determination to protect the realms from the encroaching chaos. The clash between Thor's mighty hammer and the serpent's coiled might shook the very foundations of existence. As Thor battled Jormungandrs, the protector's role became paramount. The thunder god, with lightning coursing through his veins, stood resolute against the forces that sought to disrupt the cosmic equilibrium. Thor and Jormungandr fought multiple times, but the most famous story played out involving Thor's search for a cauldron. Aegir and Ran hosted a lavish feast for the gods, but requested that they bring a cauldron large enough to brew mead for all the guests in attendance. The gods believed that the Jotun, Hrungnir, was the only one with a cauldron large enough for this task. Knowing that Thor was most accustomed in dealing with Jotun, he was called upon to retrieve it. Thor ventured to Hrungnir's house. However, during his stay, Thor ate 2 of the 3 bulls that Hrungnir had prepared for the 2 of them in one sitting. Hrungnir was furious and told Thor that they would need to go fishing in the morning for the next day's food. In the morning, the 2 got into the boat and rowed out to Hrungnir's usual fishing grounds, where the Jotun proceeded to catch 2 whales. Excited, Thor continued to row the boat further out from land, which was when Hrungnir became fearful and demanded that they row back at once, because Jormungandr lurked below these waters. Hearing this, Thor refused and dropped the oars and cast his line into the water. After an ominous silence and calm, Thor felt a mighty tug on his line. As he reeled it in, a violent rumbling shook the boat and whipped the waves. When the serpent's head with the hook in his venom-dripping mouth at last came up above the water, Thor reached for his hammer. But at this moment, Hrungnir panicked and cut the line. The howling snake slunk back down into the ocean. Thor was enraged at having missed this opportunity to end his greatest foe and heaved Hrungnir overboard. Thor, with the two whales slung over his shoulders, waded back to land, picked up Hrungnir's cauldron, and returned home to Asgard. Thor and Jormungandr were fated to meet again one day during the events of Ragnarok. According to prophecy, the events of Ragnarok would begin when the serpent of Midgard released its tail from its mouth and wriggled onto dry land. There it would join its brother Fenrir, who would set the world aflame while Jormungandr filled the air with poison. Thor and Jormungandr would meet one last time, and while Thor was fated finally to kill his foe, he would sustain mortal wounds in the process. Thor would take 9 steps after felling the serpent before succumbing to the serpent's poison and dying. In the aftermath of Ragnarok, the cosmic dust settled, revealing a transformed reality. The realms, scarred but resilient, had weathered the storm. As the winds whispered tales of gods in Jotun, Thor's name thundered through eternity. The god of thunder had not merely faced the end. He had navigated adventures, embodying the very ideals that defined Norse mythology. From grand battles against Jotun to intricate trials of wit, Thor's multifaceted character left an indelible mark on the annals of Norse mythology. The god, whose strength rivaled storms and whose courage surpassed even the fiercest tempest, stood as a symbol of resilience. His journey embodied the enduring spirit that faced challenges head-on, ensured that his legend would resonate through the ages. Thor's legacy etched not only in the annals of myth, but in the very fabric of existence. As Thor's name reverberated, as a reminder that even in the face of apocalypse, courage and strength could forge a legacy that transcended the end of days. Thus, the god of thunder became a timeless beacon, his story echoing through eternity, an enduring saga in the myths of Norse mythology.